It starts quietly. Too quietly. While most of the world sleeps, Russian cities light up not with celebration, but with fire alarms, air defenses, and the sound of explosions echoing between residential towers. What stands out is not just that Russia is under attack. It's who is leaving their fingerprints on those attacks, and how openly they're willing to do it. Over several consecutive nights, drones and missiles tied to Western supply chains have struck deep inside Russian territory. This was not a single isolated incident or a border skirmish gone wrong. It was a sustained pattern. Ryazan became the symbol of that escalation, but not the only place where the message landed. Taganrog. Different regions, same rhythm. Incoming drones, air defense fire, smoke rising in the distance, and civilians waking up to a war they were told would never reach them. Let's slow this down and understand what actually happened. On the night of January 16th, Ryazan experienced a large-scale aerial attack. Residents reported at least 15 explosions. Air defense systems were active for nearly an hour, a detail that matters because it tells us this wasn't a random drone slipping through, it was a coordinated saturation attempt. And despite that defense, at least one drone struck the facade of a high-rise residential building. Another hit a second tower in the southeast of the city, shattering windows, tearing balconies apart, ripping pieces off the exterior, and damaging cars parked below. These were not abandoned structures. They were partially occupied apartment buildings. Emergency services rushed in. Evacuations were carried out in the middle of the night. The absence of fatalities had more to do with timing and luck than restraint. A different hour, a fuller building, and the outcome would have been very different. What matters here is not just the damage, but the targeting logic. These drones were not aimed at distant military bases in empty fields. They were guided toward urban infrastructure, toward visible civilian structures. That choice carries political weight. Ryazan was not alone. In Kursk, air defenses intercepted drones over the city, with smoke reported in at least one area. Details remain scarce, which only reinforces the atmosphere that has settled over Russia's rear regions, a sense of constant, undefined threat. In Rostov, the governor once again announced that air defense systems were active repelling a massive enemy attack. That phrasing, once extraordinary, has become routine. Night after night, new coordinates, new interceptions, and just enough drones getting through to keep the pressure alive. At the same time as the explosions, another front opened, the information war. Channels linked to Ukraine's SBU, sometimes masquerading as pro-Russian outlets, began pushing claims of successful strikes on key elements of Russia's military-industrial complex. One story alleged a major fire at Atlant Aero in Taganrog, a company tied to aerospace production. Another hinted at damage to the Tank aircraft repair plant. None of these claims have been independently verified. Satellite images circulated showing destroyed areas of unknown facilities, carefully framed to suggest decisive blows without providing context. This isn't accidental. The goal isn't just physical damage. It's psychological erosion. The narrative being pushed is that Russia's industrial backbone, its drones, its electronic warfare systems, its ability to see and shield, is being dismantled piece by piece. The Orion reconnaissance drone, advanced FPV systems, electronic warfare nodes, all presented as targets already neutralized. But when you look closely, the certainty dissolves. The extent of the damage remains unclear. Some claims contradict each other. Others rely on imagery that could just as easily depict unrelated infrastructure. The story is being told faster than it can be verified, and that, in itself, is part of the strategy. Then there's the question of weapons. The SBU also claimed strikes on oil storage tanks at the Inpil refinery, allegedly using Ukrainian-made missiles. That detail raises eyebrows, because the only Ukrainian missiles ever discussed in this context are British origin systems, particularly the FP-5 Flamingo, weapons surrounded by corruption scandals and never fully accounted for. Add to that claims of attacks on a large chemical plant in Stavropol, again without solid confirmation, and a pattern emerges. Ukraine and its sponsors, especially London, are signaling something very clearly. They believe they have the right to strike not only military targets, but industrial and civilian nodes inside Russia itself. That is the line Russia is watching. Because once you accept that framing, the conflict stops being a proxy war on Ukrainian soil and starts looking, from Moscow's perspective, like a direct campaign by a NATO power using Ukraine as a launch platform. And for many within the Russian political and security establishment, that perception is indistinguishable from a declaration of war. This is where the analysis shifts from explosions to consequences. Former U.S. intelligence officer Scott Ritter, speaking on the podcast, The Greater Eurasia, put words to what many in Moscow are thinking. He didn't speak in abstractions. He named Britain directly. According to Ritter, London is not just supplying weapons, but actively participating in the planning and organization of Ukrainian sabotage operations inside Russia. He described British behavior as playing with fire and warned that Russia's patience is wearing thin. Ritter also revealed details about a new British-backed missile project known as Nightfall, reportedly designed for Ukraine with a range of up to 600 kilometers. Whether the missile is operational is almost beside the point. In his assessment, it isn't. It hasn't been completed. It hasn't been properly tested. In his words, it exists more as a political concept than a functioning weapon. And that's precisely the problem. Because even an unfinished weapon can be used as a signal, as leverage, as provocation. Ritter was blunt in his assessment. Britain is using the idea of Nightfall to sabotage any movement toward peace and to psychologically prepare Ukraine and itself for a prolonged conflict that ends in catastrophic defeat. He went further, much further. Ritter warned that if Britain attacks Russia directly, even once, the response would not be symbolic. It would not be limited, and it would not exclude nuclear options. That wasn't Russian state media speaking. That was an American intelligence veteran laying out how escalation logic actually works between nuclear powers. To understand why this matters so much in Moscow, you have to widen the lens. Russia and Britain do not share a neutral history. From the Crimean War in the 19th century to Cold War covert operations, the two states have consistently viewed each other as strategic adversaries. That historical memory hasn't faded. It's been reactivated. Every drone that hits a Russian city carrying Western guidance systems pulls that past into the present. If you're still watching, you already care about understanding this conflict beyond the headlines. And that's where the danger lies. Not in any single strike, but in the accumulation. In the normalization of hitting cities. In the assumption that escalation will always be absorbed without response. In the belief that a nuclear power will indefinitely tolerate foreign-linked attacks on its civilian infrastructure. So here's the uncomfortable question. At what point does Moscow decide that restraint is no longer strategic, but self-defeating? Give us your opinion in the comment box below. Because once that threshold is crossed, the map of consequences expands rapidly. Britain's geographic insulation stops mattering. NATO's ambiguity becomes a liability. And Ukraine, instead of being defended, becomes the trigger. We don't chase breaking news. We analyze consequences. The reality is this: Ukraine's long-range strikes are no longer just about battlefield advantage. They are about reshaping deterrence, about testing red lines. And Britain, more than any other Western actor, appears willing to test how far those lines can be pushed before something snaps. This channel has no sponsors and no editorial line. It exists only because part of the audience chooses to support it. The winners in this phase are not obvious. Ukraine gains headlines and psychological pressure. Britain gains influence and visibility. But Russia gains something too: clarity. Each strike reinforces the argument inside Moscow that this is not a limited conflict, and that its opponents are not interested in containment. The losers, as always, are civilians, on all sides, who are being slowly conditioned to accept escalation as normal. The story doesn't end here. The consequences are just beginning. If you want to help keep this analysis independent, you'll find the PayPal and Patreon links below. We'll keep tracking this, not day by day, but consequence by consequence.